What if I told you there's an organism that can control the minds of its insect victims, turning them into zombies? It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but it's actually science scary. These terrifying parasites are known as Cordyceps, and luckily, none of them target humans. But while they're not dangerous to us, they're deadly to many other animals, including some of our favorite critters like ants and bees. And their unique life cycle is more complicated than you might think. So let's dive into the weird science behind these zombifying fungi. Welcome to my channel. There are more than 600 different types of Cordyceps, but we'll focus on just one for now. That way, this won't be quite so confusing. One of the most well-studied species is Cordyceps militaris, which can turn the brains of its victims completely inside out. The life of a cordyceps begins in the wild when spores are released from the fruiting body of a fungus. These spores travel through the air like dandelion seeds on the wind until they find somewhere to land. When a lucky landing spot is found, the spore germinates, sending out thread-like cells called hyphae, which form a tangled mass called the mycelium. You may have seen something similar if you've ever grown mushrooms at home. That white, stringy stuff is the mycelium, and it's essentially the vegetative part of the fungus, sort of like the roots of a plant. The mycelium feeds on whatever the cordyceps happens to land on, slowly digesting the surrounding material and growing larger and larger. Meanwhile, the mycelium produces more spores, which are released and carried off by the wind to start the process all over again. This part of the life cycle is pretty standard for fungi. But the next part is where things get weird. After the mycelium has grown sufficiently, it sends out specialized hyphae toward its next meal. These zombie-making hyphae are called stromata, and they grow toward their unsuspecting victims with an incredible sense of purpose. Once the stroma get close enough to an ant or other insect victim, they start producing chemical signals. These chemicals are like an invitation to party, and they fool the victim into thinking it's totally cool that there's a bunch of fungus growing on or in it. If you were an ant or a bee, you wouldn't be able to see these zombifying signals. They're in the wrong part of the light spectrum. But even if you could see them, you probably wouldn't care, because they look like plain old UV light. But there's a lot going on beneath the surface. Inside the insect, there are tiny chemical messengers that help control everything from digestion to flight. But the most important ones for our story are the neurotransmitters. These messengers control how neurons communicate with each other. Neurotransmitters are released from one neuron and bind to specific receptors on another neuron, triggering a response. Think of it like handing a friend a key and opening a door. The neurotransmitter is the key, and the receptor is the lock that opens up the neuron. And just like keys, different neurotransmitters fit into different locks. So one neurotransmitter won't open every door in the brain. As the stroma grow closer to their target, they release chemicals that mess with these neurotransmitters, turning the internal communication system of the insect against itself. For example, some cordyceps turn the insect's neurons into neurotransmitter factories, pumping out large amounts of one particular neurotransmitter called dopamine. Normally, dopamine is only released when the insect is actively engaged in activities it really likes, like eating or mating. But with its internal systems overridden by the parasite, the insect starts acting like it's doing these activities when it really isn't. The cortex is basically hijacking the reward center of the brain, tricking the insect into thinking it's getting a delicious snack when it really just finds a leaf totally unappetizing. Since it doesn't know it's being controlled, the insect continues to do what the corpus wants until it dies. And when it dies, the corpus finally reveals itself, growing out of the dead body and starting a new colony of zombifying fungus. It's a gruesome fate, but these insects are far from the first to suffer it. Even though the process we've described here is pretty specific, the basic strategy of zombifying your victim is used by many other cordyceps, too. For example, Cortex and Agaricoides has a truly terrifying method of mind control. As the stroma invade the insect's brain, They trigger the release of hormones that make the insect act like an ant colony's most trusted member, the queen. With the rest of the colony none the wiser, the infected worker ants do the parasites' bidding, bringing food back to the nest for their newly christened queen, Cortex carrying her to new nesting sites and tending to her every need. And even when the zombified ants eventually die, the corpus takes full advantage of their altruistic behavior, because worker ants will often sacrifice themselves by giving up their own food stores to tend to the needs of the queen. They'll happily give up their last meal to feed the parasite. And since the spores produced by the corpus can infect other ants nearby, the entire colony quickly becomes a zombified hive of parasites. But why does the cortex need to control the behavior of its victims? Why not just digest them whole and take all their nutrients? Well, the answer lies in the fact that most Cordyceps don't kill their victims outright. Instead, they keep them alive and kicking, albeit under their control, long enough to fulfill a few important tasks. For one thing, the Zombify insect gets to be the very best, worst nest, bringing the nutritious liquid stuff of other insects right to the doorstep of the growing fungus. But perhaps even more importantly, zombification makes sure the spores have plenty of potential hosts around to infect. After all, an insect colony is often made up of hundreds or even thousands of members, giving the zombifying fungus a ready-made buffet of new victims. And since these parasites are so picky about which victims they infect, this also means that multiple members of the same species can be zombified in the same area, ensuring that when the infected insect finally kicks the bucket, there will be plenty of replacements ready to take its place. In other words, zombification is just one part of the life cycle of a super specialized predator, one that relies on unwitting insect victims to spread its spores and keep its colony growing. In fact, researchers think the specificity of these zombifying behaviors may be one reason there are so many different types of Cordyceps. Every time a new type of insect evolves, a new type of parasite is needed to keep up with it, resulting in the more than 600 types of cortex we know and love today. So why don't we use the zombifying powers of cortex for evil? Unfortunately, it's not that easy. Even though scientists have been studying these fascinating fungi for decades, we still haven't figured out exactly how they controlled their victims. We've learned a lot about the chemicals involved, but the exact mechanism is still unknown, and scientists are still working to figure out how the complexity of zombification evolved. Since the traits needed for this behavior rose independently in several different Cordyceps lineages, it's likely that there are many different ways to make a zombified insect. And figuring out exactly how all those mechanisms work could take years. However, scientists are making progress. By combining genetic sequencing with behavioral studies, researchers hope to learn how these zombie-making parasites turned altruism into a weapon. And learning more about the chemistry of zombification could lead to new pesticides. Even though we may never see real-life zombies shambling across our screens, thanks to Cortex, the truth is scarier than fiction. So we may be safe from the undead, but that doesn't mean we should let our guard down. Who knows what other horrifying things might be lurking just beyond our sight. Thanks for watching this episode. If you liked learning about the terrifying world of zombifying parasites, be sure to check out our recent episode on ancient microbes that will bring you up to speed on some of the weirdest bacteria ever discovered. And if you want to support our channel, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform. Your support helps us make more amazing videos. So, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.